Welcome to Traders Corner. As always, I'm joined by Garth McKenzie, founder and editor of Traders Corner. Garth, welcome.
Hi, Julieta.
Garth, you're going to strike an unseasonably bearish tone on the show this week, but before you do, let's discuss the market where it is and as it stands in relation to that option structure that you put in place for the portfolio last week.
Yes, okay, yeah, we're going to talk about a couple of shorting ideas on the show later, but just to sketch a bit of the background, we're going to look at the top 40 index, as we very often do on the show, just to paint a bigger picture view of the market and see where we stack up on that, and then we'll get into some of the stock ideas. The top 40 chart is up on the screen at the moment, and last week when we were here, I mentioned the fact that there was this large head and shoulders pattern that had formed on our market, and that it was looking very, very vulnerable to breaking down, and it actually did go down and break below the neckline of that head and shoulders pattern. And we were saying at that stage then that this theoretically projects quite a lot lower if the structure remains valid, and the big inverted commas on if, because I did also mention that the head and shoulder pattern is one that I found is actually not that reliable. It works probably 50% of the time and fails 50% of the time. So at the end of the day, it's not really the highest probability pattern that we have in technical analysis. Nevertheless, the pattern is still valid as things stand at the moment. And what we would need in order to invalidate this pattern is we would need to see the market trade up above the top of the right shoulder of that head and shoulder structure. Then one could say that this head and shoulder structure is no longer valid. As it is right now, it is still valid, and there's a bit of a downtrend that actually comes in on our market through these prior tops since the beginning of April. So we still need to be a bit careful. Also keep in mind that the 50-day moving average on that market is now still pointing downwards, and I always use that as a barometer of medium-term momentum. I like the 50-day moving average. It effectively represents about 2.5 months worth of trading action, and I always find that it's a good idea to align your trades with the direction of the 50-day moving average. Your probability of success then becomes greater. And right now, with the 50-day moving average still pointing down on our top 40 index, that to me still does indicate that the medium-term momentum is down for the time being.
I mean, because it does almost seem extraordinary to be all of a sudden back in the black. We've had this huge bounce. And nothing's really changed that much. The situation is still very, very uncertain in Europe. And even though China's government has stepped in to support the stock markets, it's not a given that everything is going to be rosy there as it was a few months ago. No,
certainly not. And that's right. And I think with that background, I struggle to find any strong reasons why the market's going to go aggressively higher from here. Maybe some short covering will take it higher, and I suspect that part of this big bounce that we've seen over the last couple of days has been driven by some degree of short covering. And the interesting thing is that very often your biggest rallies in a market, your biggest daily rallies, often actually happen during downtrends. And that's because you have this aggressive short covering that can come in. So I'm not sure that we're entirely out of the woods yet as things stand. And for the time being anyway, that head and shoulder structure on our market is still valid. So I'd be cautious going forward. And that's why we're going to put out a couple of ideas on the short side to watch out for this week. We're not doing any trades this week. We're going to just sit tight as we are with our structure. We've got an option structure which will work very nicely for us if that top 40 does break down any further. Other than that, I'm not really that keen to do anything else right now, but I'm going to put out a few ideas there of suggestions that I think might be something to consider for the week ahead on the short side.
Okay, well, let's start with those suggestions, shall we? Shares to shorts, it's a bit of a tongue twister, especially if you've had a couple of drinks, which we haven't at this stage. Sasol, why would you see impending weakness in Sasol?
Well, Sasol's it's generally been a bit lethargic over the last couple of months anyway. Again, we've got the 50-day moving average now pointing south on that stock. But if you actually have a look at the technicals here, notice that it has broken this upward trend that goes back to the January low. And it's broken quite convincingly down below that upward trend. It's now rallied back up, and it's now testing the underside of that prior uptrend. But now that theoretically becomes an area of resistance. So what I'm looking at here is any move and any convincing reversal in this area between 430 and 440, I would see that as an opportunity to potentially put on a short trade in anticipation that we're going to go back down to 400 Rand and possibly even a bit lower on Sasol. And if I put that in the context of the oil price, because obviously we always need to take into consideration the situation with the oil price when we talk about Sasol. Now, the oil price also has broken down below its uptrend since the beginning of January. You can see that quite clearly there. And also what's very interesting is notice that there was this triangular structure. It was a flat-sided triangle, essentially. We've got a whole bunch of flat bottoms along the bottom here at $62 a barrel on Brent crude oil. And the oil market has broken convincingly down below that support now. So that is a bearish break, and that does potentially point to the oil market going even lower. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it coming back down and testing this point over here, which is about $53. And you never know, maybe even lower than that. And I think with a deal having been struck in Iran now regarding the nuclear situation there, there's a lot of commentators that are saying, well, this is going to potentially open up the oil market from Iran that could then bring additional supply to an oil market that is already oversupplied anyway. So, and I guess part of what you're seeing in the oil price having broken down is definitely attributed to the talks in Iran. And I think technically that chart to me still looks as if it's got further downside. So if you tie that back to the share price of Sasol, I can't see any strong catalyst that's going to take Sasol a lot higher. I think that there's probably a little bit of downside risk for Sasol in the short term.
I suppose the only other factor that you haven't mentioned as far as Sasol is concerned is the rand. So if the rand were to weaken substantially, it might sort of offset a bit of a sell-off because Sasol does benefit if the rand is weaker. Yeah,
Sasol's one of the most sensitive stocks to the rand in our market. I mean, I'm not sure what the updated figures are, but I know back in the back of my memory somewhere, every 10 cents weakness in the rand translates into like another R1 billion profit for Sasol. But you said if the rand were to weaken substantially from here, and obviously yes, if the rand were to weaken substantially, then Sasol might well be able to go higher. But that's the big question. Will the rand strengthen or won't it from these levels, or will it weaken rather? Yeah. In any case, I'd look for a reversal in that 430 to 440 rand area on Sasol as a signal to go short, and then you would put a stop loss above the reversal high. So you're not just going to short and then leave it. You obviously have to put a stop loss in the event that the trade doesn't work out.
Okay, so that's a short to consider. What about Supergroup? Interesting that you've got this as an option. They came out with an announcement yesterday that they're going to buy 75% of a German company called In Time. Yeah. Why are you laughing there?
I'm daring you to pronounce the brands that company makes. There's some very, very big German words in there that
I'll refrain. Ordinary levels of incoherence are enough to deal with. So, Garth, why do you think this is also looking potentially weak?
Well, this is also based purely on the technicals here, and it's got nothing to do with the German deal that they've just done. But if you have a look, Supergroup's broken below this quite long-term upward trend that goes back over the last couple of years. You can see the breakdown over there. Also, it's broken below this area of lateral support, which is at about 33.50 Rand. And what we've seen is the breakdown. Now the share price is recovering back up to test that area, but now that is quite a strong area of resistance between 33.50 and 34 Rand. I would expect that the share price would come into a little bit of pressure over there. Notice also that the 50-day moving average has begun to roll over quite convincingly over here. And the 50-day moving average has crossed down underneath the 200-day moving average. And not that that's, for me, it's not a big trading signal really, but it's just interesting to note because that is the first time that that's happened since 2010.
On Supergroup itself.
On Supergroup. And that definitely, for me, is an indication that the medium-term momentum for the stock is rolling over. So on that basis, I would look at any reversal in this area between 35.50 and 34 Rand as a potential area to short the stock. One, I think, caveat here is just to take into consideration the fact that with that German deal, the company has announced that they will need to do a rights issue in order to fund that. What I have noticed in the past sometimes with rights issues is that the share price does tend to rally because there's often a short squeeze in order to get in and for the scrip lenders essentially to follow their rights. That's probably one caveat here which I'd just be very, very careful of. But purely looking at the technicals here, I think that chart to me does look a little bit suspect.
I mean, if you talk about a bit of a short squeeze when companies are about to issue new shares, at what point, the point of saying we're going to go ahead with a rights offer even though we haven't announced the terms, or when the terms are announced, and that's probably in a month's time when they come out with the results.
It'll most likely be more likely be after the terms are announced, but sometimes it can happen sooner than that as well. Okay. So something I've observed in the past. So I think we just need to be a little bit conscious of that. I mean, technically, this to me doesn't look great, but there is that one caveat around the rights issue that's coming.
And Garth, if that's a level where you would short, where would you look to maybe exit the trade? I mean, for how much of a correction do you think Super Group could see?
Well, it's been down to 30 Rand recently, and I think that there's probably a fair reasonable possibility it goes back to 30 Rand again and tests that level. So you'd look at a move of around about 10% down in the share price, potentially, if my analysis is right.
Okay. So I don't know if you just sort of threw a dart at all the S shares on the JSE, because the third one is Sappi. And obviously I'm being facetious here, Garth. You would have done a lot more research than that. But
it was funny, though, that you said shares to short, and all the shares to short with S's are S shares, so it's weird.
Yeah, and there's other words beginning with S and ending with T, which we could maybe refer to, but we're not going to because it's a family show. But why has Sappi also come to your attention?
Sappi also, technical structure is looking weak over here. Again, your 50-day moving average is pointing downwards, quite convincingly downwards. The share price recently broke below quite a strong area of support at 46 Rand 50. And you can actually see it had been trading between 46.50 and about 51 Rand in a sideways range for quite some time. The breakdown below that lateral support level is actually a bearish break, and it does point to further weakness in the share price coming. There's a downtrend that comes in over here at around about 45 Rand a share. So what I'm saying is that if we were to get a bounce in the share price up into this area, into the 45 Rand to 46 Rand region, that's where I would potentially look to put on a short if we see a reversal down from that level, and then your stop loss would be above the reversal high. Also, what's notable here is the negative reverse divergence. That is where your share price makes lower highs, but yet your stochastic oscillator makes higher highs. In other words, the price is more overbought now on this bounce than what it was previously at higher levels, and that is often seen as a negative setup. So I think a bounce into that 45 to 46 Rand area and a reversal down from there, for me, would be a short signal for a move back down to the recent lows, and if not even perhaps a bit lower.
I mean, I suppose maybe the one issue is that it has already broken, it is already on trending weaker. So, I mean, if you were, I suppose you could have maybe shorted it at a prior period to now. So I kind of wonder how much there would be in it, if so to speak.
Yeah. Look, on my website, we did talk about it being a short at around about 48 Rand about 6 weeks ago. Okay. But obviously, I mean, that's long since passed. I think that now, given that the share's in a downward trend, you look to short the bounces. And to me, the big resistance area is that area that I've highlighted there and that I've circled. That's where there's a lot of resistance, and I think it would be difficult for Sappi to overcome that resistance area.
Okay. So, guys, no new trades for the portfolio. You have that option structure, which allows you to participate in any downside in the market. Yeah. So we haven't seen as much downside as maybe we thought we might, given that you put it on last week, and last week was quite hairy out there. Yeah. So what does the portfolio look like? Well,
it looks absolutely identical to last week as things stand. So we still got 334,000 Rand in our portfolio. That's up 33.6% for the year to date. We've obviously got that option structure on at the moment, and that works. Anything below 46,000 on the top 40 index is where that option structure goes into the money. So I'm still very comfortable to be positioned like that. By and large, I'm still a bit wary of this market at this stage. So having that put spread structure in place for me is a very comfortable place to be right now.
And Garth, then to end off your next course dates?
I've got quite a few courses coming up this week in Johannesburg. On Wednesday and then on Saturday, I've got courses, and there's still place available on those. In Cape Town on the 15th of August, and then in Bloemfontein on the 21st and the 22nd of August, I've got courses. So anybody that would like to attend any of these courses, please email me, garth@traderscorner.co.za, and I'll send you all the information.
Okay, Garth, we'll leave it there. Thanks, as always, for joining us. Garth McKenzie is obviously founder and editor of Traders Corner.